Greetings, everyone, and welcome to We Are ACEDS, streaming live on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. My name is Mike Quartararo. I'm the president of ACEDS. Today, we're going to be joined momentarily by Ari Kaplan and Kenya Parrish-Dixon. And we'll get into their backgrounds a little bit. But our focus today is a report that Ari recently prepared entitled The Emergence of Case Strategy Technology as a Competitive Advantage in Evolving Litigation Landscape. In an evolving litigation, which he authored this past summer after interviewing dozens of law firm leaders. The development of the report was sponsored by Opus 2, which is one of ACED's affiliate partners. Thank you, Opus. And that brings me to my friend Kenya, who, in addition to being an ACED's advisory board member, is also a practicing litigator. We thought it would be interesting and kind of meaningful to our listeners if we brought together Ari and Kenya to talk about some of the conclusions in the report and the state of play in case strategy technology, how it factors into practice. Ari and Kenya, thanks for joining the broadcast. Thank you for making the time, and welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mike.
Good to see you both. I always like to start with a little bit about our guests. So for those who don't know Ari, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. What you do aside from the various ACEDS related things. What's gotten to this place in the e-discovery universe?
What has gotten you? I'd like to first start by saying that Kenya and I are both fortunate to serve on the ACEDS Global Advisory Board, and I serve as the chair. And I still remember when I asked Kenya if she would consider serving and how honored I was that she agreed to do so. So I'm just so grateful that she's here with me. And of course, Mike, we know you well, and we're proud to be part of this community. So I'm a lawyer and an analyst who covers the legal industry. I have the really remarkable privilege of convening lots of discussions, whether those discussions turn into research or breakfasts or my virtual lunch or dinners, but or our wonderful ACED series that take place on at 2 p.m. on Fridays, just to try to understand where we're headed. I'll just say my work is basically this, that when I was a kid, my dad used to always ask me to hold the flashlight, and I never liked doing this. And sometimes he'd even ask me to hold a flashlight in the daytime. And I realized over time that my dad never actually needed the light. He just wanted me to learn. And I feel like I'm still holding the flashlight, but for our community, and just trying to kind of gather all of the perspectives. And I look forward to talking about this research, given the perspectives of litigators. And I'm happy to be, joined by Kenya, who herself is a prominent litigator.
Yeah, and a storied career. Kenya's been in all quadrants of our legal universe. Kenya, oh, there we go.
Mom, I'll call you back.
It's a solicitor. So anyway, Kenya, tell us a little bit about how you found yourself in this station in life.
Oh, gee, I have no idea. Let's see, I graduated from law school in 1812 and went to William & Mary, and then joined, a law firm, went to another law firm, ended up at Lockheed Martin in technology, went to the government, FDIC, FTC, the White House, worked for a president, then went to tech startups. And all along, I think, I really want to say that was probably around 2006 when I was introduced to this idea of this technology that litigators were using. So I was a litigator at a large, well-known firm. And we had all this data. The data, there were two massive corporations that are still well-known that were battling it out. And we had all this data, hundreds of employees and witnesses that had to be managed. And I remember the managing partner telling us that his son had created this technology that we were going to use to review all of the documents. And it was just a disaster. I mean, it really was. The application kept failing and nobody had to use it. And we had all these people that were, that we were hiring to do document review, and it was just a mess. The case went fine, everything was reviewed, but I was so intrigued by the technology that I spent a lot of time examining the actual app that we were using and the infrastructure that was supporting it, because there wasn't a lot known about the data centers and the hardware that supported it at the time. And I just followed that path for quite a while. And it served me well. I mean, it really has, because who knew back then that technology was everything, and that this is where we would end up.
Yeah, no, for sure. Love it. Ari, I want to just kind of set the stage a little bit. Obviously, you produced this fantastic report. How did you get involved here? What was the overall purpose? Can you just set the stage a little bit? Give us kind of the executive level overview on the report, and then we'll get into some of the findings.
Absolutely. This is the second year in a row that I've had the privilege of collaborating with Opus 2 on trying to develop independently sourced research looking at the litigation landscape. Last year, I interviewed a cross section of litigation support leaders at large law firms for a report about advancing litigation to promote growth in what was and what continues to be a changing legal market, and trying to figure out strategies that they were deploying. It really looked at case management software. It looked at client expectation shifts. It looked at the litigation life cycle, adoption rates, things like that. This year, as you mentioned, between July and August, I interviewed 31 litigators. So what we were trying to do is create a, a, a sort of a comparison between those who are on the front lines of implementing and deploying technology for the purpose of transforming litigation, and those who are in the trenches litigating and at trial and consulting with clients. And so I interviewed 31 lawyers at large firms. In fact, the median number of lawyers at those firms was 987, so very large. 71% were partners themselves. And our objective this year was to understand, how are litigators and trial lawyers leveraging technology to stay ahead? The legal environment is changing very quickly. Kenya just talked about this need to deploy technology to manage the ever increasing volumes of data. We looked at market trends, case strategy approaches, the impact of case management software, obviously AI, and all of the various use cases that have been super practical. And essentially, the report shows that there's really a convergence of all these different operational challenges, that technology adoption is growing, but growing in a very tactical way as opposed to theoretical or hopeful. And firms are feeling this imperative now to figure out, how do I embrace AI in a way that's going to allow our work to be even more impactful and also provide greater service to our clients. And ultimately, the conclusion was there's an emergence of this new case strategy software category, so that people can leverage technology to build narratives more effectively, to tell a story in a way that may not have been as easy a few years ago. Now, all of a sudden, this idea of using technology to transform how you litigate is a reality.
And I think that's really, like, I worked in litigation for many, many years, and at the end of the day, what you want to do is tell a persuasive story. So anything that helps us get there, I think, is going to benefit certainly clients and the lawyers who represent them. Ari, in the report, you conclude that there's this shift in litigation and market trends. You alluded to it just now. What are sort of the top things that your research unearthed in this regard? And if you could compare it to last year's report a little bit, so people could understand the evolution here.
Sure. I mean, everybody who's listening recognizes that the market is changing fast. I mean, I do several reports a year looking at what's happening in law firms of different sizes, what's happening in the corporate legal department, what's happening specifically in our e-discovery community, what are the data challenges. And so last year we were looking at this, and we were trying to understand, are people using case management tools? And the overwhelming group were, what are they doing with technology? How much are they doing manually? And what was fascinating is that the amount of data has grown, people are using technology, and yet there's still manual processes that are taking place. When I asked people last year, are the trial lawyers themselves using some of these tools, there was a lot of discussion about, well, that's the responsibility of litigation support, or that's the responsibility of the more junior people. The trial lawyers are focused on actually executing on delivering certain aspects of trial. This year, the discussion with those individuals themselves was much more like, I'll take any advantage I can do to gain a competitive edge. And if that means finding missing elements that I wouldn't have thought of, and you're seeing a lot of this, you're seeing, I asked questions about, are you using technology to better value a matter? Are you using technology to expedite? How much of your time is spent on the tactical versus the strategic? And you can see elements of people feeling strongly about trying to focus more of their time on the strategic and less of their time on some of the deadline oriented tactical aspects of managing litigation, which obviously, as Kenya knows, in a large matter is a big part of it. There's a huge responsibility, but with the sort of the growing volume of data, the growing complexity of these cases, the transformational nature of regulatory environment, all of these things need to be managed in a way that is much more streamlined. And this research is really showing that. So between last year and this year, Mike, the difference was much more of a tactical look versus a strategic look. And the idea of using technology to enhance your strategy was a theme that continued to come up.
Kenya, is this resonating with, in other words, is this aligning with what you're seeing in your practice on a day-to-day basis?
Oh, yeah. So I don't remember how many months ago it was that Ari and I first had this conversation, but I believe the weather was warm. So in that short period of time between then and now, I've seen a half a dozen additional uses for AI supported technology that have, come across my plate. Some of them I have rejected strongly. And I'll tell you that when you get on a call with multiple counsel from multiple firms, just to schedule, just to start discussing the schedule of hearings, you will find that there's always one firm that wants to record everything because there's an AI tool they use to synthesize everybody's thoughts, opinions, comments, and give them some strategy. And I object to that every time because I don't want them using the things that I say in the call, but I would really like to use the things that they say in the call. So you have to consider, what you have to balance, whether using it yourself to get what you want out of the tool, is more beneficial than allowing them to have some insight into your strategic thinking. But everything from the phone calls to administrate a lot of the administrative tasks we see on a day-to-day basis that partners have no choice but to use. In a large firm like Nelson Mullins with over 1,200 attorneys and almost 40 offices, we really can have 1,000 open files per partner. That's the bat line. I think they're calling.
When you're the president of ACEDS, the phone never stops.
And so you have 1,000 files. You may know in your head, the facts of the case, who the witnesses are, what's going on with the case, and you're thinking about how to manage all of that strategically. But there are a lot of elements that you may not be aware of, and AI is very helpful in saying, just prompting, if this scenario exists, what should I be asking? What should we be doing? What elements should we be looking at? What sort of witnesses should we be interviewing? And then you can pull together these large outlines that you can then manually go through, revise, edit, and make into something that you can pass off to associates with instructions on what they should research. Once you understand the prompting process, you can get really very close to creating outlines that can help your team, help you develop the case. And if you've got a lot of cases, it's just very helpful in trying to manage a thing. And from an administrative standpoint, someone told me recently that you put all the insurance company guidelines into, the firm application. And then when you're getting all of the, the feedback about the billings and these billings, you can really go through and it will help you put the right language in order to send, all of the bills back. That's 2 days off your plate. I mean, really going through insurance billings and all the rejections and the rewrites, that's 2 days off your plate if you have the right technology in your environment.
I want to just, Mike, I want to highlight something that came out of the research that really, Kenya, to emphasize one of Kenya's points, which is she mentioned all these different lawyers are, on a call and using this tool, wanting to use that tool. Last year was a lot of exploration still. And this year is much more urgency. And I think we've moved and really crossed that chasm. Last year, I asked about competitive advantage, and there was a discussion about leveraging lots of these tools that include AI, some better than others, and that may be giving a firm a competitive advantage. And there was even a recognition that at the time that competitive advantage would be limited. The period of time for which they could maintain that advantage would be limited because at some point everybody would have a tool that had a similar functionality, which is why now that firms that might not or aren't as good or as sophisticated or capable of leveraging that tool are feeling this sense of urgency, because for sure, even though this research focused on senior lawyers, typically litigators and trial lawyers at large organizations, there is a recognition that the clients have come up to speed in terms of parity at a level of sophistication. And so they recognize that they expect their firms to be able to navigate this process really, really effectively. They ask questions about it. They want to have that conversation. They want them to have a fluency that has driven some of this urgency.
I want to follow up, Kenya, and I'll get your comments too, Ari. But I want to follow up because I sort of came up in between eras here, where I started working in legal when things were very analog, and we progressed to technology. And one of the things that one of my bosses over the years told me was that this is a game changer. This levels the playing field. This allows smaller firms to compete. And so part of the report from Opus 2 focuses on this notion of having a competitive edge. And 87% of those surveyed, according to the report, believe that an AI-enhanced case strategy provides that competitive edge. Kenya, my question is, aside from sort of enabling a smaller firm to punch above their weight, so to speak, which is what most technology enables, frankly, what, in your view, is the competitive advantage that an AI-enabled tool, whether it's case strategy or something else, what does that afford legal practitioners that we didn't have in the past?
Well, it's a time saver, right? So there are only so many matters you could handle in the past because there's only so many hours in a day and a week and a month. But now, because you have, and I see solo practitioners and smaller firms are the ones that really introduce into most of our calls a lot of the AI technology. And I see it in the work product that they submit. I mean, you can kind of still tell, but I see it very frequently from the smaller firms that we're interfacing with. So I do think it allows smaller firms to handle more matters and keep their thumb on everything that's happening. In the past, smaller firms were kind of thought of as the place where your case might go to die. They may miss a deadline. They may not be able to keep up with the volume of work. But now, not only are they recording and having all the calls analyzed and having the witness list ready, when you send, sometimes you're trying to bully the other side and send them a list of if they don't settle now, here's a list of all the witnesses that we're going to start deposing in 2 weeks. We want all these witnesses, and we've got this huge list. And within 30 minutes, they send you back a list that's twice as long. They did that with AI. They obviously took your list, inserted it into something, and they came out with an understanding of what the opposing viewpoint or strategy would be, and they send that to you rather rapidly. And the reason I know it's AI is because a lot of the times the people on the witness list are spot on, but there are also a number of people on there that, you would not have thought to yourself, this is a person, there's no value in having us depose this person. But you see the list, it comes fast and furious, and then they have time to sit down and decide whether or not you're really going to depose this individual. But you see now they're able to keep up. So when you've got a big, large firm and it's heavily, your case is staffed well, and you've got all the people with the different expertise that are strategizing on how to move forward, and you see a smaller firm is able to respond quickly. Maybe it's not filled with all the strategy yet, but they're catching up, right? So the advantages of being a larger firm, they're closing that gap. And it still takes a lot of their time, but once they're comfortable with the software and the technology, they use it for everything. Now, the good thing about being on this side of the house is that we can look at that and tell, okay, they haven't strategically gone through and figured some of these things out, but they're spot on with 30% of this. And that speed, that ability to generate that quickly is new.
Yeah. And Mike, I think that it's important to acknowledge that there are so many different critical elements of this process. To Kenya's point about the scalability of a small firm to a mid-size to a large, you're clearly seeing that flattening and an interesting landscape developing. But I asked questions about overcoming certain challenges related to case strategy. People talk to me about the time-consuming aspects are analyzing documents. 52% said that's the most time-consuming. Some people said assessing evidentiary gaps, almost 40%. Managing character information, linking case elements. All of these different processes need to be integrated and aligned. And so the more resources you have, the easier. There are more people involved, but that actually can be done now more effectively. I mean, 87% of the participants that I spoke to said that AI enhanced case strategy gives them a competitive edge. And so if you are, again, not in that group, you're clearly in the minority, and you may not be doing whatever you're supposed to be doing in the most optimal way. And I think that's a really important point. It's not looking at organizations that are deficient. It's much more trying to say, how can you improve? Where can you maintain your edge? Where can you layer on talent on top of the technology? Because that's what's really happening here. Everyone is trying to figure out, we're an incredibly successful organization. We have gifted lawyers like Kenya on our team. How do we now take technology and emphasize and amplify, as opposed to have to fight over things, deadlines, dates, technicalities that are less and less of a crucial element on the tactical side, because there are case management tools to do that. Now we're sort of advancing to case strategy.
And to give you another example, back in 1812, we used to sit, at my firm, we would sit, the whole team would get around the conference room table, and the partner that was in charge would say, there's no dumb ideas, throw everything out. And so we'd throw everything out and try to come up with our strategy, with our narrative. What documents do we need to support this? What evidence do we need? What people do we need? And so we would be throwing this out, theories of the case, we'd be throwing these things out, and about 80% of that stuff would get swept off the table and would be useless. 20% would be spot on, and then or close, and then we could take, we'd narrow it as time went on. You can do that now. You can ask AI to create that strategy for you. You can quickly go through and say, no, these 60 points are not going to help us here, because some things that you have not put into this application, right? It's giving you a very generalized, broad view, but then it's going to come up with some things that you didn't think about when you were sitting around the table. And there are going to be some points there that you go, nothing is yet surpasses the experience of being the long-term experience of being a lawyer and being trained as a lawyer. So as you're thinking about those things, you still need your own brain to strategize. but the tools can throw out things that you may not think of because you don't think of everything every time. And so there may be something there that you go, oh, I hadn't thought of that. I recently was looking at a statute that had been rescinded and replaced with another statute. But I was looking for a formula that used to be used with the previous statute, and I couldn't find it. I knew that they were doing, I knew that the government was doing something, but I didn't know how they were selecting this. And so I was able to prompt and, everything I wanted to know about this particular statute that no longer exists. And then I could send the results of that to the associate and say, I need you to research this, look for this. And she was able to find it in really a short amount of time, instead of just looking through, all this stuff about a repealed statute. And it really helped me come to a conclusion much quicker than I would have come to if we had just sat around reading all the legislative, the things we used to do. Just can't do that anymore. No one's paying you to do that.
And yet there's still some adoption challenges. And I want to segue to that really quickly and get both your thoughts on this. Because, obviously 87% is a large majority, but what is that 13% thinking, Ari? From your conversations, what do you think is the obstacle to adoption of these newest and emerging technologies, and how are firms overcoming it?
I don't think the adoption challenges are unique in this regard. Again, so if you would imagine that more than 70% of the people I talked to were partners at large law firms, and also talented litigators and trial lawyers, they have a way of doing things,
Yeah.
and they pride themselves on the experience that they've gained over 20, 30, 40 years. And as a result, technology to some individuals is more of an impediment to their particular workflow. And also they have support. So sometimes they will say, I have an incredibly smart head of litigation support, and she or he are the person that runs the show for me. And as a result, I don't know about that. And I think that my clients hire me for my intuition, my judgment, my talent, and I have a great infrastructure around me. At the same time, they recognize that when they go into court or go into a negotiation or go into a meeting and someone is able to, just sort of find the clause or immediately get to the deposition transcript portion that is relevant or, contradictory, they recognize that talent, that judgment, it can't be exclusive anymore. And so that's what you're seeing. I mean, the time frame here is also accelerating. We talk about 5 years, 3 years. I mean, things are changing every 6 months. It's incredible. Ken, you just mentioned, having a conversation in the summer, and here we are a few months later, and the volumes have changed, the players have changed, the investments have changed, the development is different. It's just an extraordinary period in which we find ourselves, and those who are most adaptable will continue to kind of maintain that edge, and those who choose to wait may be in a bit of a perilous situation.
I mean, one example of that is that, associates coming in get trained on all the AI stuff like immediately, like all of it. Like they just get all the training, it's offered to them. They get logons. They have a limited number of things. Not everyone gets a logon into every tool. And if you're a more senior person, you've got to kind of scope that out and then go back and say, well, wait a minute, can I get a logon to this? But the thought process really is, look, the associates know how to do this. And so they really are the ones who are like, they're almost, it's magical watching the associates take an assignment and really come back to you within hours, not days. Whereas it used to be, you give out an assignment, you check back in a few days, they come back in hours, and what they're doing is accurate. So it's really changing the game. But if you're an older person, you have to seek it out. And when I say older, I don't mean necessarily your chronological age. I mean, if you're a more senior person in the organization, you've got to kind of seek out some of the tools and determine which ones you want to use and how you want to use them before you go in and ask, because it's time consuming. You have to get some training. You have to have some understanding already at how to prompt these tools. And really, you could have associates and paralegals do some of that stuff. The disconnect, I think, still is that we don't share brains. So it's really fabulous that the associates and the paralegals can get that stuff done rapidly, but still the strategy is coming out of my brain. So I still need, if I could just share my brain strategy with the associates and the paralegals and they could run with it, then I'm still practicing law in an old school manner, but they're using all the new technology and you've got the meld. It hasn't happened yet, but I fully expect it to be here. I mean, this is the leaps and bounds it's every 6 months.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we're almost out of time. And before we go, I always like to get sort of your future look. Is there anything new, anything interesting coming? Is there something you want to share with our audience today about something you're doing personally, a speaking engagement, whatever? Any big things coming up for either of you? Ari, first.
If anybody's interested in some of these details, I host a virtual lunch every weekday at noon typically, and I have an extraordinary roster of in-house leaders who are going to be my guests over the next 10 days. But I will just say that this is very lucky work for me. It's not lost on me that people put their trust in me, not to reveal who they are, but to compile their views. And I feel a responsibility to share that with our community. So I'm always open to have conversations with folks. I feel tremendously grateful now, 2 years in a row, to be doing this with Opus 2, who's super committed to identifying as a leader in the space, just identifying where there are opportunities for firms. And they're just a wonderful group to be with. And I just want to say last thing, thanks to ACEDS, and also thanks to all of the lawyers who spoke to me. I mean, they give me their time, and I try to, in return, honor that by sharing this data in the most meaningful way possible with the community.
Kenya?
So I'm on panels everywhere all the time. It never stops. But I mean, really, I'm in the process of building this practice here. So I spend most of my time working because that's the gig. But I interface with a lot of newer attorneys, and I think that's the most exciting thing, because I remember many, many years ago, I went back to William & Mary to teach an introductory course in e-discovery at the law school. And the first time I went, the students were taking notes on notepads. And everyone had a notepad or a notebook in which they were taking notes. And then, a few years later, half the class had laptops and were taking notes on laptops. And then finally, everyone was using a laptop or some sort of tablet or notebook. No one was taking handwritten notes. And the first time I went back, the professors came and sat from the rest of the university, came and sat in the class because they wanted to know where the cloud was. So, I mean, things have changed. So, and many of those professors were still there. But
it's up in the sky.
But the students are so much more, they come out of law school with a very innate understanding of the technology, and they use AI for everything. So they're very in tune. They just, you just got to point them to the application or the tool, get them the training, and they're off and running, and there's no hesitation. And it's wonderful to add those people to your team.
Appreciate that. All right, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Ari. Thank you, Kenya, for a fascinating conversation. Thank you, Opus 2. If you're interested, you can learn more about Opus 2 at opus2.com. And if you're interested in our short form video interviews like this one, you can find We Are ACEDS live streams in your LinkedIn, your Facebook feeds. And if you're interested, check out the ACEDS YouTube channel where you can watch previous interviews and more. As always, thank you for joining us today, everyone, and be kind to one another.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mike.
Have a good day.